Despite the fact that Notre Dame was on a bye this past weekend, there were several results across college football that could have a big impact on Notre Dame's playoff resume. Plus, Luke Smith and I reveal our best and worst takes of the season so far. It's all coming right up.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Wojciak. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018, and now I'm a producer at Fox Sports. And I appreciate you joining me here on this Tuesday, November 5th. And thanks for making this your first listen of the day. This show is free and available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. If you are watching along, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Or if you're listening to the podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred platform. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Got a really fun show on tap for you today. Luke Smith is going to join me here in a second, as he does every Tuesday, to react to the weekend that was in college football, because even though Notre Dame was on a bye, there were several games that could be very important to the Irish down the stretch. For those of you who are up late watching Texas A&M and Louisville, a bit of highs and lows in Saturday, but we're also going to reveal our best and worst takes of the season so far. We thought it would be a fun way to look back on some of the things we said and figure out where we were right and where we were wrong. Plus, we're going to include some takes about Notre Dame from people in the national media as well. This was a lot of fun for us, and I hope you enjoy it as well. All right, Luke, fortunately, neither one of us was at a wedding this weekend, so we were able to consume all of the college football that our hearts desired. And even though Notre Dame was on a bye, it was a really eventful weekend as it pertains to the Irish. So what are some of your biggest takeaways from week 10 of the season?
I think my biggest takeaway, and this is not one that I expected to have maybe even a couple weeks ago, is that I would much rather have Riley Leonard than Will Howard or Drew Aller, which is just not a place I thought we'd be in November after how September went. But watching that game, Will Howard is probably the reason that game was a close game. I know he made some plays in the second half, but fumbling out of the end zone, throwing a horrible pick six. Really, Ohio State kind of dominated Penn State, and Penn State, once again, just a humiliating showing at home, not scoring an offensive touchdown, just same old Penn State. But that, I think, is my biggest takeaway if we're talking about Notre Dame, is that, okay, well, if we're looking at the transfer portal, I think that they were right on taking Riley Leonard over Will Howard, even though Will Howard is the guy that just won that game on the road in Happy Valley.
Yeah, the contrast in the way that people talk about Riley Leonard these days compared to how he was discussed back in September is pretty alarming, but for good reason. I mean, Riley Leonard has played significantly better since the first bye week. And as it pertains to the Penn State-Ohio State game, I ran into someone Saturday afternoon that had missed the game. They're like, oh, like, what ended up happening there? I saw the final score, Ohio State won 20-13. Like, what did I miss? I was like, well, have you watched any Penn State-Ohio State game from the past 5 years? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, well, then you know exactly what happened, because basically a repeat of so many other past meetings between those two schools. I thought when Penn State went up 10-0, I didn't think it was over, but I was like, man, maybe this is finally the year for Penn State, and they weren't able to get it done. So that wasn't very surprising, but one outcome that I did think was pretty, not shocking, but I thought the way that Texas A&M lost to South Carolina was definitely a big surprise. It didn't surprise me that they lost that game. I felt like that's a pretty obvious trap game opportunity just right off that big win against LSU, and then playing a team like South Carolina, who has been so close so many times this season. They were just ready to play. It was a special night there in Willie B. Were you as shocked as some people were that South Carolina not only won, but sort of ran away with it?
I'm not shocked that they won. And frankly, that place once a year in November just seems to kind of be a buzzsaw for whatever reason, for whatever ranked team. It happened in Tennessee a couple years ago. It happened to Clemson as well, I'm pretty sure. Was that game at South Carolina as well? I don't remember. In 2022, they went on that run, and I know
with Spencer Rattler.
Yeah, for sure. Tennessee, I think, was a home game. But what was surprising was just like how porous the Texas A&M defense was. I think they had something like 25 missed tackles, and that's kind of what it looked like towards the end of that game. I mean, that running back, Rocket Sanders, was just running through them. And then what was equally surprising was a week after Mike Elko was happy or very not gun shy about pulling his starting quarterback for another guy when it was obvious Marcel Reed did not have it and cannot throw the football. They never went to Connor Wegman in that game. So I don't know if that's more of an indictment on where Wegman's head is right now and they just didn't trust him in that spot. But man, Reed was horrible.
He was, and I felt like if there was a defense that could contain him, it's South Carolina because they have such good athletes on the defensive line, but they really stuck with Reed there. They tried to force him into basically a drop back passer, and it was just not working against that defense. I looked it up. That game with Clemson, South Carolina was actually at Clemson, but you're right. South Carolina went on that crazy stretch there to end the season. They beat Clemson. They ended up losing to Notre Dame there in the Gator Bowl, I believe it was. But you're right. There's usually one game a year.
So it was the Tennessee game where they blew him out at home.
Yeah,
right?
And Hendon Hooker tore his ACL in that one. It was just a house of horrors for the Volunteers that day. There are a lot of people who watched that game with Texas A&M and South Carolina, and now they're concerned about Notre Dame's strengths of schedule and how they stack up against some of the other top teams. I do think it's going to be a factor, but ultimately I have felt the same about Notre Dame and their record, their resume. Like if they go 11-1, they are in no matter what. Like there's really no scenario where they finish 11-1 and don't make the playoff. But I do believe that there's a world where that loss impacts their seeding, especially when you compare Notre Dame to some other one-loss teams. So how big of an impact do you think Texas A&M's loss to South Carolina will have on Notre Dame's strength of schedule?
Well, it does impact the strength of schedule because they have a second loss. I honestly do kind of feel like there was a little bit of a fluky element to that. And like, I wouldn't be surprised if Texas A&M turns around and beats Texas at home on Thanksgiving weekend and still makes the SEC championship game, just based on what we've seen from Texas the last few weeks too. But I think when we look at Notre Dame's schedule, as long as Louisville doesn't slip up and Army holds serve outside of the Notre Dame game, like they're going to have 3 ranked wins, and there's not going to be a lot of teams in the country with 3 ranked wins. Which is partly due to these mega conferences and the unbalanced scheduling. But how many teams in the country are going to have 3 ranked wins?
There's not going to be a ton. It is weird how it all shakes out. And did you see what happened to Navy last week?
I did. There was also like a 6-hour delay in that game, which I'm sure didn't help. But I mean, after seeing them play, I'm not that surprised that they dropped another one.
Yeah, that's a tough game. Tough back-to-back sequence there for the midshipmen. They didn't even get a single vote in either one of the AP or the coaches poll. But despite that loss for Texas A&M, Notre Dame did get a boost courtesy of Louisville as they went to Clemson and just absolutely pantsed the Tigers. I thought there was an outside shot that they could compete in that game. I mean, they just had not looked good really ever since that game against Notre Dame. And then they showed up and they dominated a Clemson team who going into that, everyone was really high on. They were ranked in the top 10. Some people were like, they're flirting with the top 5, which is something that I never really understood because even though they had been beating teams decisively ever since that loss to Georgia, like I could not get that Georgia game out of my head and how overmatched they look in the second half of that game. Well, now Louisville gets to win. They are now ranked 25th in the AP poll. And now all of a sudden, that win looks a little bit better for Notre Dame. Is it going to change the course of like the playoff, the seedings or anything like that? No, but it's definitely something that Notre Dame could sort of hang their hat on, especially when that win really had lost its luster ever since the Irish actually beat them on their home field.
Definitely it helps, and it's interesting because I felt like when I saw that spread was 10, it was a lot of points, and I think you actually said it's not enough, if I recall correctly.
I did. I was wrong.
Morning.
I was very wrong
so
about that.
It makes you a little bit annoyed that Louisville let one get away at home against SMU, to be honest, because that would have cured some problems for Notre Dame.
And Miami, too.
Yeah, that one less so. SMU, I'm just saying 2 losses. They're out of the field because SMU has the potential to potentially cause some problems for Notre Dame. I think they might very well end up with a very similar resume to Notre Dame. So that scares me a little bit. They need to get tripped up in this last little stretch here. But it definitely helps getting another team back in the top 25 who you beat at home.
I did enjoy SMU just beating the absolute piss out of Pittsburgh, though.
Well, that was not surprising. We knew that Pitt sucked. So
31-3 at half.
Yeah, yikes.
It's a little bit harder for Narduzzi to win when the opposing team's quarterback isn't just gifting them pick sixes every single drive, as was the case in the Syracuse game.
Yeah, or it's as he's proven time and time again, when his team has expectations, he's just a complete and abject failure at getting them ready for it. So that's what happened again.
So now Notre Dame is 10th in the AP poll, which, as we know, does not matter. They are 8th in the coaches poll still, but the real poll that matters comes out later tonight. the first college football playoff rankings of the season. Where do you think Notre Dame will end up? Not where they should. Where do you think that they'll be ranked tonight in those first rankings?
I'm going to guess like 11th, probably.
Oh, wow. That's pretty low.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think I'd rather err on the side of caution than just be optimistic about this, because I know that the AP poll and the playoff poll have no correlation, but seeing BYU also jump them on a bye week, I know that they beat SMU, but like that was just a really dumb correction in my mind when you watch the Big 12 and just everybody kind of stinks. I would really like to see BYU trip up in one of these last 4 games because I don't think they're very good, but I do think they're going to get the benefit of being undefeated. Similar story with Indiana. I know Indiana's been killing everybody. They haven't played anybody at all. And this Indiana thing is it's reaching a really annoying level for me. There are so many IU fans in the city that have never existed previously. And I think they probably went to 1 or 2 Indiana football games their entire college career there. So that I would love to see them lose. And honestly, if Ohio State beats them 50-0, thank God, take them out of the picture.
I totally understand why you feel that way about IU. Unfortunately, I think they might actually be really good.
Maybe they are, but I need to see them play somebody with a pulse.
I get that. I watched that Michigan State game. Sparty goes up 10-0, and you're thinking, okay, this is the first time all year that Indiana has even trailed, which is pretty absurd that we're in November, and that's the first time they trailed all year. And you're like, all right, maybe this is the first time where they look a little bit vulnerable. And then they scored 47 unanswered points to finish the game. And I was like, you know what? IU is just good. I think if you're beating teams like this, even though I'm with you, they haven't beaten one ranked team. I think they've beaten like one team with a winning record. Like, if you just continue to pulverize every single team you play, eventually that has to count for something. So I actually do think Indiana is good, and they should be ranked pretty high. I think Notre Dame will end up at 9th in the first CFP rankings. I think the top 5, there's really going to be no disagreement on. It's going to be some combination of Oregon, Georgia, Ohio State, Miami, and Texas. But then after that, I think there are arguments to be made for and against all of those teams there in the mix. I think what they're going to do is they're going to go with Tennessee, IU, and Penn State, some combination of that, all ranked ahead of Notre Dame. So they're going to finish 9th. But I think that they should be 8th, because at this point, I just don't understand why Penn State would be ranked ahead of Notre Dame, because their best win is USC, who continues to lose games. I think they've lost 5 games by a grand total of 19 points. So I'm not just writing in Notre Dame as a win over the Trojans there at the end of the season. That game still really concerns me. But if that's your best win for Penn State, that's not really a great win. So they're kind of in a position now where their best win is a good loss, I guess you could say, to Ohio State at home. But ultimately, I think Notre Dame is going to have a pretty good chance at hosting a playoff game here now at the end of the season, because I think more carnage is expected. And you're right, if Texas A&M is able to beat Texas there at the end of the season, that would help out the Irish a lot with their resume.
Yeah, I mean, if we're being honest, I don't think that any of Indiana, Tennessee, Penn State, BYU, Miami, SMU is better than Notre Dame. But I think there's a world where those teams, maybe not SMU, but those other teams are ahead of them. I think Penn State's best win, honestly, is probably Illinois, who's 6-3. But that, when you say that out loud, that's not something you want to hang your hat on.
Yeah, and that was an ugly win, like 21-7, and then Oregon just destroyed them.
If you ask me, Penn State has no place being in the top 10. I don't think they're a very good football team. I mean, like they play somebody with a pulse and they can't score an offensive touchdown at home. That's embarrassing.
Who would you take, Penn State or IU, head-to-head, neutral site?
Honestly, I don't know.
I know I'm forcing you to pick the lesser of two evils in your mind.
I kind of hate them both. I guess I would have to say IU.
What about Tennessee? How do they compare to those two?
So for me, for Tennessee, and I was kind of saying this to you earlier because I was trying to figure out why are they ranked ahead of Notre Dame again? And honestly, I completely forgot they beat Alabama. And I think what that says is more so about that win against Alabama. That was a really ugly game. Neither team looked very good, and maybe just more of a statement on how good or just kind of average Alabama is this year. And frankly, I was annoyed to see them at 12 in the poll, in the AP poll this week, because if there's one thing that I want for sure out of this college football playoff, it's Alabama not to make the first iteration of it.
That's a fair take. And I felt like Tennessee and Notre Dame had pretty comparable resumes.
And I think they're trending in different directions.
Yeah.
Like Tennessee was beating up on some bad teams earlier in the year. I've watched a lot of Tennessee. I'm just not impressed with Nico at all. Like, he's just not there yet. And then meanwhile, like, their offense can't really do a whole lot. Notre Dame's offense is going the opposite direction. So similar resumes, I suppose. Just Tennessee's loss at Arkansas a little bit more understandable than, losing to Thomas Hammock and the boys. But other than that, like, I think that the resumes are similar, but the teams are trending in opposite directions.
I know. Who would have thought going into the year that Tennessee would be basically a ground and pound team who relies on their defense for wins, especially when they put up 51, right, on NC State at the beginning of the year.
Right.
And Nico looked awesome. And you're thinking, man, this is going to be like that Hendon Hooker team where they just put up 40 points a game and you like pick your score. But that's where Notre Dame stands right now. Again, we're still in early November. The first rankings usually do not tell the whole story, but I think Notre Dame is going to be right there in the mix, but I think ultimately they're going to be 9th tonight.
And I think that's a really good point, and one that I was just going to make, because I was looking at this recently. I think in 2014, so the first time the college football playoff rankings came out, I think Notre Dame was something like, let's see, I'm actually pulling it up right now. They were number 10 in that. Of course, that team would then go on. They started, I think, 6-1 and finished 7-5, right? Could you tell me off the top of your head who the top 4 teams were in that first iteration?
I just know Mississippi State was one.
Yep.
I know that they have the title of being the number 1 ranked team in the inaugural CFP rankings.
That they do. Florida State 2, Auburn 3, Ole Miss 4. So you had 2 teams from the state of Mississippi in the top 4. Of course, neither of them made the playoff that year. And the only team that made the playoff in the top 4 from that first iteration was Florida State. So a lot can happen, I guess, is the point. And that's what I have to keep reminding myself of when I'm going to get annoyed seeing Tennessee ahead of us. Like, Tennessee could be a 3-loss team. They're going to lose to Georgia and Athens. And honestly, they could lose to Vandy. So, like, that's just kind of what I have to talk myself into is these teams are going to lose again. I would have liked it if Indiana had already lost. Similar story. I would have liked it if SMU had lost that game when they turned the ball over 6 times and didn't. But
so
but yeah, that's just kind of what we gotta keep ourselves aware of. Things change.
Luke will join us again in a second, but first it is time to recognize the Roy Player of the Week. So far this season, we have pulled over $20,000 to support players on Roy. Micro deposits lead to massive change. With the Roy app, you can direct your support to the athletes you love, ensuring that all funds go to the specific player you choose. Unlike collectives, you know exactly where the sport is going, and you even receive exclusive content like personal videos and updates after the season. The best part is it is risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't deliver the content, you get your money back. And this week, I'm supporting Jeremiah Love. I just pitched in $100, and I'd love for you to join me. Even $10 makes a difference. Let's show love to Love and keep him connected to our school. Remember, pay today, celebrate tomorrow. Your support sets your team up for success. Plus, don't miss out on Roy's exciting giveaway. Win 2 tickets to a game in November. Just download Roy, create an account, and enter referral code LOCKEDON, and you're entered. And if you're already on Roy, any contribution to an athlete's campaign also gets you entered automatically. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Download Roy now and join the NIL game with no subscriptions and no fees. And be sure to check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Roy_return-on-you for more info. Roy, support the players, change the game. Today's episode is presented by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. All right, I'm not going to lie. We have been in a bit of a slump lately so far. I gave out the Chiefs -9.5. They did not cover. They beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in overtime. So today, we're just going to table a pick. I need to do some more research, and then we'll come back with another one for you later on in the week. But that is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, so now that we discussed the potential CFP rankings tonight, let's talk about the best and worst takes from the season so far. So basically, Luke and I use the bye week rather than going over like the 3 things we liked and didn't like as we normally would do after a game. We're like, what were we most right about and what were we most wrong about? We've given a lot of takes, given a lot of opinions on this show dating back to the preseason. Now here we are in November. So there's plenty of different takes we could choose from. We each picked 2 that we were right and wrong about, and then we found one both positive and negative from someone outside of the Notre Dame, or not necessarily just Notre Dame, but just like the national media. So, Luke, why don't you lead us off with the take that you were most right about going into the year?
So I'm going to say that it was my thought that Jeremiah Love would be the team's MVP. Now, some people might argue, and I'd hear them out, that Riley Leonard is the team's MVP to date. But I think what I really meant by this is Jeremiah Love is going to be Notre Dame's best player, and he is. It's kind of funny, though. I was super high on him having a breakout year and being that best player. And I think I said something like, he's going to be that guy who he was in high school where he had 5 touchdowns in a state championship game, which is what he was. But it's funny when I think back on the summer, I get that Xbox, I get NCAA 24, and I'm playing the game and I'm watching Jeremiah Love and I'm kind of a little scared. I'm like, I think they made him too good at this game. Like, there's no way like he's actually going to be this good. And as it turns out, the game might have been spot on. He has been just terrific all season. And to me, he's the best running back that Notre Dame's had in a long run of really good running backs. And I'm really grateful that they get him again next year.
I know exactly what you're talking about playing that game because I put him at punt returner, kick returner. Yeah. I love running that jet sweep with him when he's lined up in the slot. It's unstoppable. He is so good. And it really, like, the only downside to Jeremiah Love's game this season has been the fact that he doesn't have more touches. Like, it seems like that has been the only complaint about him from a week-to-week basis is why is he not getting the ball more? There have been a couple odd games like that Stanford game where Notre Dame was really feeding the ball to Jadarian Price, and I still think Jadarian Price is a really good running back. I mean, he has 3 touchdowns this year. Price is averaging 6.4 yards per carry, but it did feel in that Navy game like Notre Dame just sort of embraced Jeremiah Love. It's like, look, this is the clear RB1 option for us. He was getting carries on 3rd and short that he hadn't really been getting. He was coming in more pass block situations. So it seems like as much as Dylan McCullough wants to rotate, it is just so clear that Jeremiah Love needs to be on the field as much as possible.
Totally. And I think when I speak to him being the most valuable player, like when you look at the game they lost this year, I'd argue the reason they lost the game outside of Riley Leonard just not playing very well is that they didn't give him the ball after he made one of the most ridiculous plays you'll ever see on a football field, hurdling a guy for a touchdown. They just went away from him for whatever reason down the stretch of that game. I think if they changed that, they probably win that football game.
You know, it's wild. I have not seen that play since that weekend.
I mean, I don't plan on going and finding it.
I know. But it's such a bummer because that was literally one of the most impressive plays I've ever seen a Notre Dame football player make, and it's just going to be lost to history.
I know. But that's what happens. When I don't know how many times I'm going to say this, but when you lose to Thomas Hammock and the boys. So there you go.
I have a feeling that Thomas Hammock and the boys might be coming up a little bit later. So before we get to that, I want to highlight another player because I feel like I was very right about Christian Gray. This dates all the way back to spring practice. I felt like that was going to be his coming out party. We didn't hear as much great things about Christian Gray back then. But then again, that's like 15 practices in the middle of March and April, so who really cares? But I really thought he would have a breakout season this year, and he has been great. I gave him the Kyron Williams Joe Alt Award before the season started when you and I did our preseason awards. He has allowed just 15 catches on 28 targets this year for 112 yards. That's basically nothing at this point in the season. He has 3 pass breakups. My one complaint about Christian Gray is that he only has 1 interception. It seems like he's dropped about 4 more. Needs to get a little bit better at that. But on one of the most crucial plays of the season, 4th and 1 against Texas A&M, he's right there to make a play. Could have been a pick 6, but still the fact that he jumped that route, made a play, was so impressive. And I believe that was his second career start, right? Because he started, I believe, in the bowl game. Right. He has not given up a touchdown yet, and the longest reception he has allowed this season went for 13 yards. I know that this is kind of a interesting time to bring him up because his Navy game was probably the worst one of the season for him so far, but I think what he has done in just his second year with the program has been so impressive, and you think about what that combination with him and Leonard Moore is going to look like next year. It's going to be special.
It really is, and thankfully it is, because right now they only have, 3 healthy scholarship cornerbacks. I know that they got Tay Johnson back, moving from safety to play corner, so it's like 3.5, I guess, if you want to call it. But if he wasn't as good as he was, I think that secondary would be in a little bit of trouble. As talented as the safeties are, and as talented as Leonard Moore is, because they just don't have that many bodies back there without Benjamin Morris and with Mickey and the portal.
Right, and he's so crucial to Al Golden's defense because he wants to run man coverage, and there's just not many cornerbacks in college football that could play it as effectively as he does, and Notre Dame has two of them, including one true freshman.
Yeah. Can I get into the next thing that I think I was right on?
Yes, please do.
So I came onto this show on July 24th, and we did this sort of 5 burning questions thing, and I sort of said this in jest, but my 5th question was, what if the punter just sucks? And that came from, they get this guy, James Rendell from Australia, who's never played football before. I know he's played Aussie rules football. He was previously committed to Hawaii. That was where he was going to play football for the first time. And Notre Dame gets him. And let's be honest, he hasn't been good all season. And frankly, I'm surprised it hasn't cost Notre Dame a game. He's the 107th ranked punter in the country. And just every time he boots the ball, it looks hideous. I know that there's been some chatter about how the way he kicks it might even make it difficult for guys to catch it. We've only seen that once, and it was Navy, so I don't really know that I count that. He's just been bad, and I hope it doesn't cost them a game, but maybe, next year you focus on getting somebody in the portal that's actually played football before. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, and it's not like Notre Dame was groundbreaking and going to Australia to find a punter. Like, people have done that in the past, but when Notre Dame's only competition for James Rendell's services was Hawaii, I agree with you. That was a bit of a red flag that maybe we all just missed. And it also doesn't help that Bryce McPherson, the punter that Notre Dame essentially was like, go ahead, leave, because he didn't really like the tough coaching style from the Notre Dame coaching staff. He's been really good at Maryland this year. He's probably getting a lot more opportunities playing for the Terps. But yeah, I think Notre Dame took a risk there. It hasn't really worked out. I don't know what the deal is with his eligibility. That's a whole different story. So it's like, did you really invest in this guy for 1 year, where if he's going to be around next year and maybe with the full year under his belt, he actually becomes the weapon that he was described in preseason camp? But yeah, so far it has been a dud.
It has, and it is, just as an aside here, it is funny to think about a punter complaining about tough coaching. Like, how tough can it really be? Just kick the ball. But then again, this is the same coaching staff that said they were telling James Rendell to do too much or asking him to do too much, which I've never heard of a 5-tool punter. Apparently, that's what we got here. So,
I mean, you could really expand this out and just be like Notre Dame's special teams play, because that was just not something that we really talked about. But up to this point, it's just been such a disappointment.
It has, and it continues to be a concern with this prolonged questionable status of Mitch Jeter, but that's not for here nor there.
Yeah, I do not love that at all. Hopefully Notre Dame is not in a position where they need a game-winning field goal or go-ahead field goal late in the game until, I don't know, maybe the playoff, because the fact that Mitch Jeter is still questionable at this point is not great. All right, my next one, and I'll admit I don't deserve full credit for this one because I did not predict that Notre Dame would lose to Northern Illinois. But I remember doing my game preview for that game, and I said that I was nervous about it, and I expected a letdown, and my God, I got destroyed in the comments. And when you consider the circumstance at the time, Notre Dame had just come off one of the biggest wins, certainly the biggest win of the Marcus Freeman era, and like everyone was drinking the Marcus Freeman Kool-Aid. He had that video that went viral when he's pumping up the team beforehand. And I think a lot of people interpreted me saying Northern Illinois would have a chance in this game as me saying like Marcus Freeman, wasn't the coach. And everyone was like, oh, we have turned the page. That's a Brian Kelly era. And I went back and I remember going through some of the games that happened even prior to Brian Kelly about how this team had let down after a big win against teams in which they're a double-digit favorite. And Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. So, again, I don't deserve full credit here. I said it would be a close game in the second half, but I thought Notre Dame would pull away, and they did not.
No, they unfortunately they lost, and I don't know that I will ever quite get over that one because, man, it is so bad. As an aside, I learned earlier this week that Thomas Hammock gets a year extension I forget what the raise is every time he makes a bowl game. So they're stuck with that guy for 5 more years. So I don't think NIU fans are too happy about that now, but at least, they're making some whiskey to celebrate or commemorate this win, which I don't know if you saw that come out today, but there's
what's the deal with that?
I got to find this tweet. It was from Matt Fortuna, but essentially NIU came out with, or I don't know if it was NIU or Boneyard Blend, a Northern Illinois / Whiskey Acres co-branded bourbon, is releasing November 15th. It celebrates the win at Notre Dame and NIU Athletics' 125th anniversary with a bottle featuring the words Boneyard Blend, no luck needed, and 16-14, the final score of the ND game. Yeah, so that's just lovely.
No luck needed, but they scored their only touchdown on perhaps the
miracle.
Luckiest play I have ever seen inside Notre Dame Stadium. If King Stigliamo is just able to get a hand on that, who knows what happens this season. However, you do deserve some credit. Maybe this gives you honorable mention, things that you were right about, because after that game, I think some people were like, oh, well, maybe Northern Illinois, it could be the group of 5 playoff team. And you're like, no, this team stinks. They're going to stink. Whoever they're playing next, they're going to lose to. Sure enough, they lost to Buffalo. They followed that up with a loss to NC State. They did get a win over UMass at Bowling Green, and then they have lost their last 2 to the Toledo Rockets and Ball State. Yes.
There's an NIU bar right by my apartment, and it gets ugly in there on Saturday mornings. All right. They can only ride that high, that wind so long, as much as Thomas Hammock would like to believe otherwise. But maybe he's looking for a consulting job from Freeman, because whatever he told them after that game really must have helped. The Irish have won 6 in a row, right? So
that's true. So if Notre Dame goes 11-1, makes college football playoff, Mark Strum needs to send a letter to Thomas Hammock. Okay, now we want to go with takes outside of us that we think were the best takes so far about Notre Dame this season. I want to give some love to Stanford Steve from ESPN. He said before the season that Notre Dame had the best secondary in college football, and I give him props for that because Benjamin Morrison and Xavier Watts were known commodities. Watts had just won the Nagurski Award. Benjamin Morrison was on the first round or maybe early second round on pretty much every mock draft that was out there. But he was really high on Jordan Clark, Adon Schuler, and Christian Gray before they had really played meaningful snaps at Notre Dame. And he was particularly high on Jordan Clark. And I remember listening to it at the time. And I'm like, okay, yeah, Steve, but you also work with Ryan Clark. There's probably some bias here. And sure enough, everything he said about Jordan Clark was right, because he has been awesome this season. I thought he went out on a limb saying that before the year, and I would say if they're not the best secondary, they have been very close all season long.
Yeah, shout out to him. He hit it on the head. I don't think I could have ever predicted that Adon Schuler was going to be as good as he's been this year. If you think about it, I don't even think that we thought he was going to start going into camp, right? I think we thought Rod Hurd was going to be back there. Rod Hurd has not been a bad player. He's not been a miss in the transfer portal by any means. He's been productive. He's been helpful. But I think that just goes to show you how good that guy is. And thank God he's a sophomore. And I think probably has 3 more full years of eligibility. I think he redshirted last year, right? With an injury. So am I right on that?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, that secondary has been great. Shout out to Steve for calling that out.
All right. Who's yours?
So I'm actually going to go with Mike Denbrock here. And if you recall, he said in the preseason, one of the first days of camp, that the offense was going to be a process. And basically, he was warning us. And offensive coordinators don't do this. Coaches don't do this. But maybe when you're as seasoned as Mike Denbrock, you just don't really you're not going to lie. You're just going to tell it how it is. You've seen it all. But it's funny. I'm actually reading Tom Noy's article from August 12th right now. I know you just had him on your show to do a basketball preview, but this article is actually a little bit funnier than I remembered. So Denbrock walks into the interview area after practice and says to the reporters, "Tell me something good." And Tom Noy's point back to that is his job. He's supposed to tell us early in camp the offense is clicking, yada, yada, yada. The actual quote from Denbrock here is, "It's an understanding that this is a process and this isn't going to be a polished piece of glass at Texas A&M. This is going to be something that evolves as the season moves along. I believe we're going to continue to get better and better at what we do, but mindful that we've got to go into the Lions' Den early in the season." I think people probably thought that the Lions' Den meant Kyle Field. I think he just meant September in general, honestly, maybe now. And what he said has proved to be true. It was very much a work in progress in September, but into October now, as they're getting into November, this is looking like a really much better and improving offense.
That it was, and he certainly called his shot there. I would contest that if he was that knowledgeable of the struggles on offense or he was that prepared, then maybe he should have called a different game against Northern
NIU.
Illinois.
Fair enough.
Yep.
Fair enough.
But
fair enough.
We have talked a lot about that game. That actually leads us to where we were wrong, and I think, unfortunately, we have to talk about NIU just a little bit more.
Yeah, so I said Notre Dame was going to go undefeated, and I think along with that comment, I think I might have made like some other thing about how this year would be a success if there were just no like offensive no-shows or something along the lines of that. So that, of course, happened at NIU, and they lost to a middling MAC team, and it's something that we're never going to be able to escape the stain of. It's like we'll see if a couple playoff wins makes us think of this season differently. And I am starting to have fun with it again, but man, like just the fact that that game on September 7th happened, it's a tough one.
It is. It is. You know what? Another tough one is, this is a take about a player. I looked it up. 4th of July mailbag. I got a question from T Walker 88 who asked, who would be the most impactful transfer on the team not named Riley Leonard? I mentioned Chris Mitchell as a popular pick. I felt like it was a good decision, and I honestly considered going with him. Even if I had, it still would have been wrong. But I said it's going to be on the defense, either RJ Oben, Rod Hurd, or Jordan Clark. And I picked RJ Oben, who to this point on the year has had 10 tackles and just 3 quarterback hurries on 186 snaps. He was billed as a pass rusher. He does not rush the passer. He has 0 sacks, 0 tackles for loss, and he is going to get beat out by a true freshman in November. So you can't win them all. And for Notre Dame, they have hit on a lot of guys in the transfer portal. Unfortunately, RJ Oben has proved to be a miss.
He has, but in fairness to you, like I think of the non-Leonard transfers, he was probably the most proven commodity, right? So you look at his stats from last year, he had 6 tackles for loss and 5 sacks. He at Duke over essentially 5 years of playing, really his last 3 years at Duke. He's a 6-year guy. Wow, I forgot about that. Yeah. If you look at his last 3 years at Duke, he had 14 and a half sacks and a pick too. Like, where has that guy been? It's been remarkable that for a 23, 24-year-old kid, he's had a poor year and he just hasn't shown up. So yeah, it's tough. The answer to this one is probably Jordan Clark, I would say, but shocking just how bad he's been.
Yeah, and you're right. The fact that he was a 6-year player, also he played well against Notre Dame last year. It's like we had actually seen it happen. And if you looked at his stats, there were numbers that were comparable with Javonte Jean-Baptiste. So I can't believe that it has worked out like this. I'm sure Notre Dame feels the exact same way, especially after they basically ran off Nana Osafo-Mensah. But so it goes. So that was one tough one for me. One that actually has not been as bad for the sake of the Notre Dame football team. I said that the offensive line would be the biggest weakness on the team, and they've had their struggles, sure. I mean, Northern Illinois wasn't great, but they have not been a liability at all like I thought that they could be going into the year. They've allowed just 10 sacks total. That's tied for 21st in the country. They're 5th in yards per carry with 6 yards per attempt. So credit to Joe Rudolph, man. What he has done with this offensive line, especially one that has dealt with all the injuries that they've had, they have been much, much better than I ever would have anticipated.
They really have, and I also do want to, give some of this credit to Riley Leonard and his sack avoidance, which remains just a ridiculous trait that he has. But you're right, they're like, and somebody was talking about this earlier today. I think maybe from Irish Illustrated. Like, you have Anthony Knapp out there at left tackle, and there hasn't been a play where he's like led to a turnover. Even like there's stuff like that. Like, I know he's good for one kind of egregious holding game, right? Exactly, but not necessarily like game-altering plays on offense where you're getting your quarterback killed and losing the ball. So yeah, it's been a lot better than I think we thought it was going to be. And as I kind of said last week, I think Joe Rudolph deserves a lot more credit than what he's getting for what he's done with these pieces.
Absolutely. What's next for you?
So similarly, I was not sold on Drake Bowen in the offseason. In fact, I think I thought that KVA would kind of supplant him by this point in the year, maybe even a little bit earlier. Turns out KVA is playing a lot too, but Drake Bowen and him can play a lot side by side. And he's been very good and very violent. I don't think he's probably got to be one of the players on Notre Dame's roster that opposing quarterbacks have just wanted to get hit by the least, because he just smokes everybody he touches. So I didn't really see this for Drake Bowen, but he's been fantastic, and that's been a really big plus to the Notre Dame defense.
He's tied for the team lead in tackles, which is not something I really would have expected at this point in the season. But you're right, he has been really, really good. Also has a sack, a couple pass breakups. Like, he's a lot more athletic than I thought he'd be. And I remember watching his high school tape, and he played literally every position for his high school in Indiana, won Mr. Football and all that stuff. But you're right, he has been awesome this year, and I'm so excited about what him and KVA are going to do for years down the road, because that's a really exciting duo up there in the middle. All right, as we now shift to worst takes outside of us, I got to call out my guy here, Joel Klatt, who picked Navy to beat Notre Dame outright. I remember when I heard that, I was so shocked in the room, because he has been so high on Notre Dame all year. But credit to him, he has received a ton of flack for this take, deservedly so. But on a show, one of his episodes last week on the Joel Klatt Show, at the end, he was like, look, Notre Dame fans, I hear you. I was so wrong. He ate all of the crowd that he needed to take. But that was tough, man. That was tough. 51-14.
Yeah, and then they turned around and lost to 2-6 Rice, who had just fired their coach. But I guess you got to own it when you're wrong, which is part of what we're doing here too.
Yep. Hey, look at us, man. We're staying humble, hungry, but what else? Oh, wait, no. You've given us all the takes that you were most wrong about. What's the worst take you have seen from someone outside of us?
So I'm not going to name this guy, because I don't even know if I've said on the show how I feel about him, but I don't feel particularly warmly about him. There were a lot of reactions after the NIU loss, some worse than others. This was easily the worst. And I think like the worst part about this was that it was Monday morning too. So there had been like 2 full days that had passed, and he's looking for a replacement for Marcus Freeman. And he names 4 names that are just horrible, but 2 in particular. He asked if Notre Dame should go out and hire Scott Satterfield or Dave Doran, along with Eli Drinkwitz and Glenn Schumann, the Georgia DC, who might be a good coach, never been a head coach before. But are you kidding me? Scott Satterfield and Dave Doran to Notre Dame? Like, and they put this guy in a documentary on the football team, that they being Peacock. Like, I still can't believe that he made the cut in that. Just unbelievably poor judgment on whoever signed off on that, because this guy doesn't know a darn thing he's talking about. But that one, I think, takes the cake for worst take I've seen all season.
Scott Satterfield, who couldn't make it at Louisville,
who they want to fire from Cincinnati.
And Doran, I mean, he's been around for a while there at NC State. I don't think anyone in that fan base is like, yes, 5 more years.
I guess maybe if we just wanted to learn something from another former NIU coach, then yeah, maybe let's bring him on board. But that was just staggering.
All right, there you have it. The best and worst takes from the season. Any initial thoughts on Florida State before we let you go?
So I was trying to, over the last couple of days, like find some reason to be concerned about Florida State. And like what I really keep coming back to is like, it's still Florida State, like garnet and gold, like they got those jerseys. And then Saturday, you look at the box score and you see they lose to UNC, who is bad, 35-11. And they have the least amount of touchdowns of anybody in the entire country, having scored points, more than 21 points in a game all season long. Like, it's shocking how bad they are. This might be the worst season I can remember from a team ever. And that's like, I'm serious. Like, I genuinely think like they are that atrocious.
It is the worst season of any team to ever field college football.
Like, I would put them up there with like the 2008 Lions going 0-16 or whatever that was, because these guys went 13-1 and now and the one was a loud one, but holy smokes, they are just atrocious.
All right, that is a perfect note to end it on. Luke, we'll see you next Tuesday.
All right.
Today's episode is also brought to you by ZBiotics. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Here is how to use it. Step 1, drink pre-alcohol. And for best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, drink responsibly, pace yourself, hydrate, and get a good night's sleep. Step 3, enjoy tomorrow. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Go to ZBiotics.com/LockedOnCollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On College at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money back guarantee, so if you are unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to ZBiotics.com/LockedOnCollege and use the code LockedOnCollege at checkout for 15% off. All right, that is going to do it for today's episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. Tomorrow, I'm going to be right back here to react to the first CFP rankings, plus I'm going to do my full preview of the Florida State game. Then on Thursday, recruiting analyst Eric Thomas from Irish Illustrated is going to stop by to talk about the huge recruiting weekend coming up for the Irish. They are going to have tons of important visitors on hand for the game against the Seminoles. Then on Friday, I'm going to be doing another mailbag. So remember, get those questions in, folks. Lots of great stuff coming your way this week. The best way to never miss an episode is to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to the podcast. Have a great day, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow.